Hello, my name's Graham Mooney, and this brief presentation is about plagiarism. We're going to talk about what plagiarism is, why plagiarism matters, particularly for students when they're writing assignments, and we're going to make some suggestions for good practice on ways to avoid plagiarism. Why does plagiarism even matter? Well, to begin with, it's just poor ethical practice. Basically, it's stealing something from somebody and not giving them credit. Overall, it undermines scholarly and academic integrity. If somebody's plagiarising, then it calls into question the work that everybody does. So not only is it deceptive, but it also places you at an unfair advantage. If you're passing off somebody else's work and somebody else's ideas as your own, then you may be gaining an advantage compared to, say, fellow students in your class who've tackled a similar assignment. And also, there's the chance that if you do plagiarise and it's discovered, you'll lose marks, you may be downgraded, you may have to drop a class, and in particularly egregious examples, you may put your whole degree in jeopardy. And before I go on to note the definitions of plagiarism, I just want to say here that most of the information in this presentation comes from the American Historical Association's Statement on Standards of Professional Conduct. And what they say is that plagiarism is the appropriation of the exact wording of another author without attribution. And it can also be the borrowing of distinctive and significant research findings or interpretations without giving proper citation. And the interesting thing about these definitions is that they are made without regard to intent. So claiming unintentionality just provides an easy excuse for sloppy work and convenient cover for somebody who's plagiarised. So an instructor, when they're grading assignments, doesn't actually need to consider the intent until after he or she establishes plagiarism has actually occurred. That is when intent becomes important in assessing sanctions. So how can you avoid plagiarism? Well, most cases of plagiarism involve one or another of the following. Improper paraphrasing. So when you're using another historian's work, make sure you put an author's phrase into your own words. Don't just copy it verbatim. You also want to make sure that you place quotation marks around direct quotes. Don't quote from other authors without attribution and pass it off as your own words. And it might also include the failure to cite sources. You need to use a reference system for endnotes and footnotes in order to avoid plagiarism, and most word processing software includes some kind of referencing and endnoting and footnoting system, and will even format those notes on a consistent basis for you. So let's actually have a look at a quick example of plagiarism just to give you an idea of what we're talking about here. And what I'm going to do is compare two excerpts from Montcalm and Wolfe, which was written by Francis Parkman and published in 1885. And on the left hand side you have Parkman's original, on the right hand side you have a plagiarised version. And it might be an idea now just to stop this presentation, compare and contrast these two excerpts yourself and see if you can spot the examples of plagiarism that we're going to be talking about. First of all, the plagiarised version on the right copies Parkman's language almost verbatim in two places, and you can see them here highlighted in red and highlighted in blue. There's no use of quotation marks here, and there's no citing of the actual source material in the plagiarised example. So you've got two phrases that appear in both passages without any sort of amendation or rephrasing. And in this example, the plagiarised version paraphrases Parkman's work poorly. It retains too much of the original language and organisation. So in one place, for example, highlighted in red here, had abandoned the contest in despair is simply changed to abandoned the competition in despair. The plagiarised version also replicates Parkman's structure way too closely. From beginning to end you can see that there's a similar sequence of sentences and ideas. typified by the example here in blue, where the paragraph ends with England being the mistress of the seas changed to England ruled the waves. And what this example shows is the real significance and importance of citing your source material. The plagiarised version does actually have a good example of this, where quote marks are placed around a phrase, where the wording is lifted from the original, and there's a proper citation given, and this is highlighted for you in red. But what the author of the plagiarised version really needed to do was cite Parkman's work as the source of the entire paraphrase, and not just that singular quote. How can you avoid plagiarism then? Well, when you're taking notes, you should adopt some good practice. Put quote marks around passages that you transcribe word for word, because when you come to write an assignment in a couple of months, or sometime next year, or at the end of the course, as sure as eggs is eggs, you won't remember whether it was a direct quote or not that you've transcribed from your source. And even if you paraphrase when you take notes, you need to make sure that you're giving credit to the author's ideas. Otherwise you'll be passing off the author's original thinking as your own, and that's plagiarism too. What else can you do to avoid plagiarism? Well, make sure that you're building plenty of time to finish assignments by the set deadline. That way you won't be tempted to copy and paste or miss quotes and citations because you're in a rush. And also, for work that you're expected to complete on your own, try to avoid actually writing in groups. Now, this doesn't mean that you shouldn't discuss or debate topics of assignments with classmates and instructors, but you do need to make sure that you don't end up plagiarising each other in your written work. If you are ever in doubt, please do ask your instructor. Believe me, it is way better to clear up any issues around plagiarism before you submit an assignment than it is afterwards. Okay, so hopefully that gives you a brief idea of what plagiarism is about. As I said earlier, if you need to, go to the American Historical Association's website and have a look and see what they've got to say. And they've got a load of other resources for you to follow up.